Welcome back. So today I want to discuss a myriad of different things, including the composition of blood, like what we find within the blood, and hemostasis. So I kind of just want to, let's just dive right into it and let's explain all this stuff. So say you've been to the doctor and the doctor takes a vial of blood. The vial of blood might be about this tall or so, and it's in a tube, and this tube is usually called a centrifuge tube. And I'm going to draw a centrifuge tube. And if you don't know what a centrifuge is, it's just a thing that you put stuff in and it spins it around and it shoots all the heavy stuff to the bottom. So if we did that to blood, and this is normal blood, we have three main things that we see within it. So the top layer is plasma. Then we kind of have this thing called a buffy coat or buffy layer. And then we have red blood cells. And these colors are not realistic colors, just so you know. But, so we kind of have this thing in plasma. Plasma is built up of 98% water, and then the rest is albumin or just plasma molecules and things like that. We will discuss later on. Buffy layer, we have two different types of red or blood cells, right? We have red and white blood cells. Buffy layer is built up of those white blood cells. And then red blood cells is red blood cells. And we'll discuss red blood cells and what red blood cells are later in this video. But then we could also have an abnormal centrifuge tube. And an abnormal centrifuge tube could look like this. So now this is an abnormal centrifuge tube. And if you look at it now, I'll ask, what do you see differently? And what I see differently is right here. The plasma looks relatively the same, but the buffy layer is significantly greater than that of the normal one. And the red blood cells is significantly less than that of the normal one. Same volume, same centrifuge tube, same centrifuge machine. But the issue with this one is this most likely is presenting leukemia. Which leukemia is a very tough illness, and I am sorry if you or anyone else know someone with leukemia, but you might be like, well, okay, so like, why is the buffy layer so big? And you have to think about what the role of white blood cells is. And the role of white blood cells is to fight. They fight for us, and it's in our immune system, right? So that's kind of the generic makeup of what's going on within the blood. As we look back on that centrifuge tube that I had, we had that red blood cells on the bottom, and so I kind of want to jump into what in the world a red blood cell even is. So, and the red blood cell is built up of these things called hemoglobin. It's built up of hemoglobin like that, and there is approximately 250 million of these within one red blood cell, and we have so many red blood cells. So it's kind of crucial to understand that we have this difference, like how small we're looking actually, and how minuscule these things are. So if we kind of look up into the hemoglobin molecule, we'll see again, as I drew right there, we'll kind of have these four protein-looking things right like this. And within these four protein-looking things, we have a molecule called heme. And heme is something that we'll talk about today in quite some depth. And within the hemoglobin molecule, we'll have some alpha and beta cells, right? And they project each other diagonally. And as they project diagonally, we could see several different myriad of things. So we could understand and see that when a baby is within the mother's womb, they are receiving a lot of blood. They're receiving their blood and things from the mother. And so the baby within the red blood cells, they just have beta cells. They don't actually have gamma cells, or they don't have beta cells and they only have gamma. So this is like a normal human adult a person that is not within a womb like me or you watching, hopefully, will have beta cells, but a baby will actually have gamma cells, and this actually will hold oxygen, or it will, hold oxygen longer, but will actually release oxygen faster. Again, we have our heme molecule. Again, a heme molecule is a very complex in nature molecule, and to actually understand what's going on with heme and how heme breaks down, like what I'm going to explain, because I'm explaining the whole life cycle of heme, we would have to understand organic chemistry. And I'm not trying to make you understand organic chemistry. This channel is about physiology. It's not about organic chemistry, even though organic chemistry is very important to physiology, and I know a lot of organic chemistry. I'm just going to try to explain this in the simplest manner possible. So we have a heme molecule, and a heme molecule, the main importance of a heme molecule is this. Fe, if you look on the periodic table, is iron. And this iron heme molecule will actually have 4 oxygen gas molecules on it. Which is kind of weird, again, if you know organic chemistry, but that's what a heme molecule is. So I'm just going to draw like this heme molecule. And a heme molecule will, so if we think about the life supply of blood goes out throughout the body, it gets oxygenated, goes to wherever it needs to go, goes through the capillaries like I talked to you about, and red blood cells end up in the spleen. This is where the red blood cells kind of go to die. And so the breaking down of hemoglobin to heme actually happens with macrophages. And so I'm going to just kind of draw this, kind of like this, macrophage. And as heme breaks it down, again, we'll have another breakdown heme into, and now it kind of looks the same. And again, this is where organic chemistry knowledge can come into play a little bit, but not super necessary. All we really need to understand is double bonds with an oxygen. And so as it conjugates itself and double bonds with these oxygen, it becomes a different molecule. And this molecule is called biliverdin. Hence the reason why I'm using green, verdin. And as biliverdin is created, biliverdin turns into bilirubin, which I'll just call BR for now. Bilirubin. Now, bilirubin will actually go into the liver. And because I'm not that good at artistic ability, I'm just going to draw the liver as a square. Now, as bilirubin goes into the liver, several things can happen to it. And so, the main thing that happens to it in the liver from the spleen, again, this is right here is all happening in the spleen. We have the bilirubin molecule, which I'll just do it like that, and it will actually begin to attach to sugar molecules. We all love sugar, and so does bilirubin. Bilirubin attaches to the sugar. That's the point of it being in the liver. And after it's in the liver, it will actually go into the small intestine, which I'll draw like this. In the small intestine, there's bacteria that love sugar. I love sugar. This bacteria also loves sugar. And the bacteria comes up and eats the sugars off. And as it eats these sugars off, it turns into urobilinogen. And urobilinogen, I'll just write as UB. Urobilinogen. And you might be like, well, Jackson, like, here it's bilirubin, and then here it's bilirubin with sugar on it. And then you take the sugar off, now it's something completely different. It's called something else. Well, it's because it's had a different experience through life now. It's a different person now. Even though it's pretty much the same as a different person. That's why we name it something different. It's just like, I don't know, a basketball player coming back and changing their number. And so now urobilinogen has a different lifespan than a lot of things. So if it stays within the intestine, the bacteria will keep eating on it. And as the bacteria keeps eating on it, it will turn into something called stercobilin. And this is a brown color. And as you know, stool, or maybe, hopefully you know, but stool is brown, right? And so that's what gives stool its color. But if it goes into the bloodstream, and then from the bloodstream goes into the kidney, then it becomes, urobilin. Not urobilinogen, urobilin. And urobilin is yellow in color. And what makes urine yellow. So this is the whole lifespan of heme, right? We have it go throughout the body, it does its thing with the oxygen, but then it goes to the spleen, and then the spleen disposes of it properly. And that's how we have these things. So now I want to explain the clotting cascade and hemostasis, and how hemostasis actually is super important in our lives, and we don't really recognize it. Okay, so now I'm going to explain to you what in the world is going on with when you cut yourself, like I have, and you get a scab. So this is kind of the clotting cascade, if you will. So let's explain it. Let's just go right into it. So we have a blood vessel. And the blood vessel on the edge of the blood vessel has this thing called basement membrane that I'll draw in blue. This basement membrane is negatively charged. And so that's what I'll draw right here. These basement membranes are negatively charged, and it's going to be important to understand a little later into the video. So the vein is actually lined with these things called epithelial cells. Epithelial cells are very important because they are full of these things called von Willebrand factors. Now, von Willebrand factors are proteins that are positively charged, and they get released from the epithelial cells. So I'm just going to draw it VWF. VWF gets released. And as you know, as I've explained to you earlier within this video, we have plasma is within the blood, right? That's passing through here. If I'm going to draw plasma, it has a red little thing right here. So this is like a plasma cell, if you will. And they flow through the vein, and that's just what happens. And these plasma cells have 3 separate receptors on them as they receive different things. And so I'm just going to kind of draw them like that. And these receptors there's an ADP receptor, a von Willebrand factor receptor, and TXA2 or thromboxane, which thromboxane is a fatty acid, thought you should know. But they have different receptors, and so that's very important. So as we know, the epithelial cells are releasing this von Willebrand factor, this protein. This protein has a receptor on the plasma, right? And as it has a receptor on the plasma can become activated. As the plasma becomes activated, it releases granules. And we have dense granules and alpha granules. But before I kind of explain a lot of this, I'll go into depth about it. Don't worry. I want to explain what happens when we start bleeding. So the vein gets punctured in some manner. And I will just draw it right here. Just erase it. Sorry if you're drawing in pen. My professor did the same thing to me. So we have a hole, right? But we still have the basement membrane. As the basement membrane is still there, and we have a lot of these von Willebrand factors, they begin to attach because it's negatively charged. The negatives and the positives attract. And so they begin to attach up here. As they begin to attach up there, we have to understand that the plasma has the VWF receptor on it. So that, again, is attracted to it. So eventually, the plasma will go there. If you just kind of think about kinetic energy and how everything's just moving kind of randomly at some point. Obviously, there's a flow in an average vector going this way, but eventually one of these plasmas is going to go up there. And as that happens, we kind of have the plasma begins to activate, and it looks like this. And this is very cartoony, but it's actually kind of what it looks like. It spreads out and it has all these wings and different things that happen throughout. And as it spreads out and all these different factors happen to it, it starts to release those granules like I was talking about. So it has these granules that it begins to release. And these granules, there's a different manner of granules. Like, again, I told you there's dense granules and then there's alpha granules. And dense granules are built up of calcium and adenosine diphosphate, ADP. And alpha granules have histamines in it and things like that. But all we really need to focus on is ADP from dense granules. So again, these things are released. And the ADP, because there's an ADP receptor on it, will activate more plasma. As plasma gets activated again and again, we have just more plasma that's just getting activated like this. And again, all the plasma have different receptors to it. And a von Willebrand factor can actually bind the two together. As they bind the two together, another one could bind and another one could bind. That's a clot can happen. And that's mainly how our bodies begin to start doing this clotting. And like a scab is just a clot. It's just a blood clot, but it's done in a safe manner. Some people, for example, could have a really, really, really slow venous return. As they have a slow venous return, sometimes these plasma cells can get activated within each other because of these granules that get released, and because there's also these von Willebrand factors throughout, they can actually connect like this and create a clot. But it's usually not something that we have to worry about. But I kind of want to understand. So I'm talking about these factors. I was talking about these von Willebrand factors, and these factors are pretty much proteins. They're just different things that we have that make things to happen, I think, is the best way to probably say it. And so as these factors begin, and as things begin to happen, we have more and more activated platelets. We had more activated platelets. I don't think I said these are enough platelets, but we have fibrinogen kind of go between the two. And fibrinogen is very important, and we'll discuss where fibrinogen comes from right now. So again, fibrinogen is kind of all up in there. So I'm going to kind of erase this one so we have a little bit more room to see what's happening. So we have we'll call it the clotting cascades. And so we have three, sorry. We have the common cascade, or common, just factor cascade. And then we also have the internal pathway and the external pathway. So I'm just going to kind of go in with it, and I'm just going to start doing the internal pathway. So again, we have the cell getting broken again, right? And so as the cell gets broken, we have the same thing happen. And as the cell gets broken, we have factor 12. It all starts with factor 12. Factor 12 gets activated by collagen. Collagen's in this, so I'm just going to draw collagen. Collagen. Can you see that? Yeah. And then we have factor 12 activated. That's what the little a means, just activated. As factor 12 begins to activate, we actually now have factor 11. And factor 11 is now activated by the active form of factor 12 activation. And then you're like, oh, okay, 6. So 12, 11, 10, incorrect. I'm sorry, it's incorrect. I thought the same thing, but it's just not that way, you know. It actually just goes to 9. So now we have, it looks significantly just confusing as it possibly can be with 11 and 9 right next to each other in Roman numerals. But it's just how they discovered it, and we should be calm, like whatever. And as factor 9 happens, we also have factor 8, which this makes sense with factor 8. So you might think like, okay, like we had 12, 11, 10, or we have 12, 11, 9, so maybe this is like an 8 or something, but then we use 8 here, so it's like, I don't know what we actually use. We actually use 10 here, and then 10A. Now 10A goes from, it uses factor 5, and then it helps, and it takes 2 to 2A, and then this will go 1 to fibrinogene. We have fibrin strands. So again, this cascade is pretty important, but also very confusing for fun. Just not like any of this stuff's hard to learn, but that's just what goes on, right? We have fibrin factors, and then a lot of these other things have different names to them. So like 1, for example, is fibrinogen. And as 1 is fibrinogen, we have 2A is thromboxane, and so forth. And that's pretty much what we need to understand. But we could name these two into 2 different things. So we kind of look for the 10 one like this. And then we call this the so you're like, okay, intrinsic, common, like that's sick, but I feel like I'm missing something, and you are missing something, and that is the extrinsic pathway. So the extrinsic pathway is relatively the same, and I want you to kind of remember all this, but let's just kind of draw it. Need a little bit more space, so let's just draw it right here for fun. So again, we have the vein, and I know it's a significantly smaller vein. We have the basement membrane. And this time we have, well, not this time, but all the time outside of the veins, we have cells. And these are just called extravascular cells. Sorry. These extravascular cells, again, I'm just going to draw them as boxes because easiest that way. They just kind of chill right here, and so it depends on where you're at. This could be skin cells, it could be smooth muscle, but either way, they have this thing called tissue factor. Now, tissue factor kind of resides within each and every single cell, just like this. And tissue factor plays a very important role in what I'm about to explain. And so I'll just draw a tissue factor. Tissue factor is actually factor 3. And factor 3 comes from vitamin K, which I'll explain to you a little bit later, but we do need to understand tissue factor, factor 3, vitamin K. So what actually happens here, we have the same issue. We have a hole. But this time I don't want to really pay too much attention to the basement membrane. As we have a hole, we have factor 7 come in and get activated. And as it's activated, we have factor 10 turn into factor 10 aggregate. And that's the extrinsic. So again, the TF is factor 3. And as the TF is factor 3, we have to understand that vitamin K is crucial in the process of creating scabs and healing these walls. If we did not have vitamin K, then we would not have factor 3. If we did not have factor 3, we would die. Hate to be the bearer of bad news, but that's just what would happen. But anyway, something that is slightly more... This relates more to us right now. NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, like ibuprofen, aspirin. They actually are COX inhibitors, and COX inhibitors decreases thromboxane release. As the decrease in thromboxane release, it kind of plays an effect with all this. Remember, thromboxane is 2A. So say you're going to the hospital to get a surgery done, the surgeon or the doctor will ask if you're taking any medications, and mainly what they're looking for is if you're taking NSAIDs. Obviously there's other medications that could play roles that we haven't learned yet in this physiology, but they do want to know if you've been taking NSAIDs for this reason. And if you've been taking a lot of NSAIDs, you've been taking a lot of aspirin because you've had a lot of headaches, whatever it may be, then they might actually have to give you a vitamin K shot, or they'll just pump you with fresh plasma, which is very beneficial that we have this type of technology nowadays. But another clinical setting for what I've just taught you is warfarin. So there's some like pest control companies that use warfarin. So this is why it's super important that we keep kids away from things, because these warfarin will actually destroy factor 3. And as factor 3 decreases, the body's ability won't heal, and actually they'll have shards of glass in it that will just destroy everything. And so then it can't heal, and then because factor 3 is missing, they actually have an increase in thirst because of what I explained the last video with angiotensin and everything. Then they'll actually leave the home to find a water source and to drink, and then they'll die out there. So it's actually a very beneficial pest control thing, but you can see the implications that this would have on a human that would be extremely negative. So say someone comes in, they're having issues. How do we test what's going on? If they're having issues, say with the clotting cascade, or if they're having trouble with factor 3 and you want to understand what's going on, if it's an extrinsic factor, if it's an extrinsic pathway, a problem with that, you'll run a PT test. If it's intrinsic, then you'll run a PTT test. These will help. PTT test will get factor 12 going, and as it gets factor 12 going, it'll just help the whole cascade and everything. So yeah, if you do a PT test, then you'll get increase in INR, and as you increase INR, that just increases the time you have to clot, which can be beneficial for people that can't clot or can't heal themselves. And so that is my video. I'm sorry it is very long, but we did discuss a lot of important things today, and so I hope to see you next time, and adios.